Just do your thing. Yeah. What's up, brother?
He calls himself Den Den Marriott, a poor man weathered from years working the cane fields.
Yes, man. The famous Den, the jump player.
He's paddling a homemade boat on a muddy canal hunting fish, the evening's meal. During much of Jamaica's nearly 58 years of independence, the government could barely keep itself afloat, let alone help people like Marriott. But in less than 7 years, a remarkable thing has happened, says Finance Minister Nigel Clarke.
Jamaica is has achieved record low unemployment. We've never had unemployment this low in our entire history. We are seeing elevated levels of economic activity. When you speak to business people in Jamaica, every business person of all ages, including those who are grandparents, they will tell you that they have never experienced a business environment as positive and as active as the one we have today.
All of what Clarke says would have been unthinkable in years past. In the late 1990s, unemployment stood at 16%. Today, it's below 8%. In 2013, Jamaica was one of the world's most indebted nations. Servicing the national debt took nearly $4 billion, about 50% of Jamaica's budget.
You're quoted as saying, this is just not sustainable anymore, where Jamaica's living month to month, quarter to quarter. What was it? What was going wrong?
For several decades, Jamaica has struggled with unsustainable debt. What unsustainable debt means a level of debt that the economy cannot service without significant trouble. And in 2013, Jamaica had gone as far as it could, and the country hit a proverbial wall.
For decades, economic growth had barely a heartbeat. Debt kept increasing. The country was surviving on loans from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, loans that never led to an economic recovery.
There was really sort of I don't know, maybe this is the wrong word to use, but kind of an acrimonious relationship with the IMF for a while, right? I mean, over the decades.
Yes, so Jamaica's had shall we say, a tortured relationship with the IMF for most of our independent history. Prior to these last two agreements, Jamaica would have had 14 previous agreements with the IMF, which should have lasted a total of approximately 26 years. And I think that I'm not in any fear of contradiction if I were to say that none of those agreements achieved their intended purpose.
But those last two agreements changed Jamaica's fortunes. The IMF loaned the Bank of Jamaica, its central bank, about $2.5 billion. The money came with conditions, among them freezing public sector salaries, higher income tax on the wealthy, and taxes on gasoline, cigarettes, alcohol, privatizing the seaports and airports. Wayne Robinson is deputy governor of the Bank of Jamaica.
The key part of the economic reform strategy was the reform of the central bank and the reform of our monetary policy strategy to one that it's more focused on inflation. And in that context, the central bank's mandate would be primarily inflation, and we will be held accountable for inflation. So in Jamaica's historical context, that represented a significant shift.
For decades, the BOJ had focused on keeping interest rates low and printed money so the government could finance its budget deficit.
Was it difficult to make, for a central bank, to make the switch to what it historically had done, right, to where the thrust is inflation, controlling inflation? Was that a tough transition?
So for the central bank, I wouldn't say it was a major challenge. Where the challenge comes in is how to sell this to the public, how to get the public to understand this.
So how do you get everyday folks to comprehend, without their eyes glazing over, the importance of controlling inflation? Enter Tony Morrison, head of communications for the BOJ.
I was called in one day by a deputy governor. He laid it out to me and then gave me a challenge. He probably got a little nervous about giving me afterwards. He stated clearly that this has to be bigger as a communication program than anything we have ever done before. It has to be huge, it has to be bold. I needed to go hard or go home.
What Morrison came up with has so far proven ingenious. Use music.
So there's a song that I say, I pray for my friends to be healthy, dripping in ice, living wealthy. God never want our pocket fee empty. Cut out jealousy, greed, and envy, cause all we need is just love.
Taurus Riley, a Jamaican reggae artist, was brought in to sing about inflation.
All the high prices that mean me harm, hey, they can go back where they came from. No inflation monster shall prosper, yeah. So that middle ground is what we want. Low, stable, and predictable inflation. Because low, stable, and predictable inflation is to the economy like what the bass line is to reggae music. Listen up. It's definitely unique, and so far the response has been grand, and it's going to reach more and more people, and we have to keep the conversation going.
So consumers can buy more goods with them cash, committed to make the economy grow. Predictable, stable and low, inflation targeting the way to go.
The message was low and stable inflation, predictable, stable and low, inflation targeting the way to go. There was a singing happening, the car driving all over Kingston, the car showing finance, showing industries, showing everything.
The inflation targeting campaign also includes signs on electronic billboards, about 20 of them across the island. The combination of messaging, belt-tightening, and a focus change by the central bank has brought down inflation from nearly 20% to, get this, less than 6%.
I was going to say, because the IMF really considers Jamaica now sort of the poster child for this incredible turnarounds, right?
I would say that Jamaica's turnaround in the context of two successive IMF programs is a significant achievement for Jamaica and a significant achievement for the IMF. Jamaica was able to reduce its debt by 50% of its GDP over 6.5 years without debt write-off, without debt handouts, without supranational support, or without help from quote-unquote friends. And it's an incredible achievement that doesn't have much precedent.
No, it doesn't. Jamaica's turnaround is a tremendous achievement for the island of 2.8 million people and for the IMF. Historically, the IMF's austerity measures as conditions for loans didn't work in Latin American countries like Mexico and Brazil and led to deepening recessions. Today, Argentina's economy is in a downward spiral, $100 billion in debt, including $57 billion owed to the IMF. In Jamaica, the national debt is still high, about 95% of the island's gross domestic product, GDP. But 7 years ago, debt was a staggering 147% of the GDP. The plan is to keep bringing it down.
The government's goal is to reduce Jamaica's debt by about 35% over the next 5 years. Ambitious, but if they can pull it off, that would leave more money available to reinvest in education and rebuild the infrastructure.
Better roads are needed to connect cities, which will drive economic expansion. Educating kids in the technology fields of the 21st century is a must.
The world is changing and changing rapidly. The jobs of the future are certainly not going to be the jobs that we had 20 years ago. And so we have a challenge to reorient our education system to accomplish that.
17% of the people live in poverty. For them, access to health care and nutrition must be addressed. But signs of the turnaround are everywhere. High-end car dealerships have opened in Kingston. New construction, once stagnant, is booming. Agriculture has been struggling, but now old sugarcane fields are being turned into sod farms. Like a drink being poured, domestic and international investment is pouring into Jamaica. Ian Deere is a Jamaican businessman and entrepreneur.
In the past, a lot of efforts would be just seem impossible to try and achieve locally. Now, with the interest rates the way they are, the access to capital, the landscape has just dramatically changed. I mean, there's literally no project now that we feel as Jamaican business people that we can't take on. And we are taking it on.
To that end, Deere's company, which employs 1,300 people, has 9 new projects in the works. His daughter, Lauren, has even opened a small flower shop business of her own.
The shop, I mean, it's a big undertaking though, isn't it?
It is. Oh, it's hard. It's not easy opening a business, especially someone so young, green in the industry. But you learn along the way, figure it out.
Mark Gale is another of the young entrepreneurs finding opportunity in this new economic environment. He and his partners opened a greeting card business.
We reflect Jamaican culture. So for example, this card, it says, "Me need you like everything, need little pepper," because Jamaicans love pepper. And inside it says, "You spice up my life," right?
They've been so successful, they've expanded, targeting women with their line of oversized bags called One Bag of Things. Of course, tourism remains the economic driver. In 2019, about 4.5 million people visited the island, bringing in nearly $4 billion in revenue. That's 50% of foreign exchange, and the numbers are going up every year.
So how important is tourism to the continued growth of the economy here?
I think tourism today is probably the most important industry we have, especially with foreign exchange. There's no doubt that in the past years, 20, 30 years ago, you had bauxite, you had sugar, bananas, all those have fallen by the wayside. Today, tourism is definitely the most important industry we have.
In the next 5 years, 10,000 new hotel rooms are expected to be added, putting more people to work. Already, tourism is responsible for 25% of all jobs. The more jobs, the fewer people living in poverty.
We want our people to overall be wealthy. I mean, we want our people to grow. I mean, it should not be for a small segment. It needs to be a strong middle class, and we need to have aspirations to be a strong first world nation in the Caribbean.
And that is certainly music to the ears of the Jamaican people.